Okay, it looks like we're live. So let's get this show on the road. This video is about why I left my last full time job as a computer programmer. Now, I started out exploring computer programming when I was only 8 years old, because we're talking back in 1978. I started out watching a program called Marlowe and the Magic Movie Machine. And the thing that fascinated me about that program was that uh, they were using what looked like a talking computer. Now, of course, it was all fictional. It was just a bunch of electronic equipment set up to look like a talking computer, but it was just a guy off camera talking through an oscilloscope that uh, was visualizing his voice, and you could tell it was a real person talking, and uh, and they were entering codes to represent uh, movies that they would bring up, but it was all staged and fictional. There wasn't really a computer there. It was just somebody showing videos or films. But because it looked like a talking computer, I was just so fascinated with it. Especially, I remember being obsessed with the fact that when Marlowe would press the buttons to enter codes, it would make sounds like touch tone dialing. So I remember I would call up my friends or my cousins and talk to them about the show, and I would start dialing numbers on my phone to talk about that they're entering these codes to bring up the videos and stuff. So I was like so fascinated and obsessed with that show. But the bottom line is that because it was a talking computer, I became interested in talking computers in general. And uh, my mother just happened to get me a book out of the library about what happened to be computer programming. It actually covered programming on mainframe computers, but it just happened to cover the basic programming language, which happened to be the way that computers were programmed, the microcomputers that were coming out at that time. Because we're talking 1977, 1978, when various computers were just starting to come out, like the Radio Shack ones, the Apple ones, uh, Commodore, Atari. They all had, there were all these companies that came out with these microcomputers that were the first computers that were intended to be sold to individuals. And I just got so fascinated with those computers because I happened to be hanging out at a Radio Shack, and I discovered that this TRS-80 computer could be programmed in BASIC, which I was familiar with from reading the book that I'd read. Now, I remember at one point, uh, my family and I were in Arizona. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, and we had to go to Arizona because my grandfather was in the hospital. He was on his last legs, and we had to go see him. And so we took an emergency flight out there over Thanksgiving of 1979. And when we got there, uh, my parents felt that because we'd be sitting around a hospital all day, I'd be bored. So they wanted to get me a computer manual to read because they knew that I was really interested in that stuff. So we went to a local Radio Shack in Arizona there, and I remember picking out a computer manual, and it happened to be the level 2 basic manual. I don't know why I didn't start with the level 1 manual, but for some reason I remember reading the level 2 basic manual, which was more of a reference manual, but it did make sense to me because I was so familiar with basic programming from the first book that I had read. And later on, I did read the level 1 manual, and it really covered a lot of stuff that was in that first book that I read. So it didn't really matter that I was starting to read about TRS-80 computers with the level 2 manual. So we so we were at the hospital. I remember sitting around reading the manual and having a good old time. I remember I had that to do, and I also had a chess computer that I enjoyed playing with to allow me to play chess without having another person to play with. So that was another thing that I enjoyed at the time. And so that's pretty much how I spent the time in Arizona for the 3 days or so that we were out there. And so I remember I was like so fascinated and obsessed with computers. And I had, after about a year or so of being so obsessed, and I used to write code out on with paper and pencil because I didn't have a computer to experiment with. But then after about a year or so, um, my father somehow started talking to the family dentist about that I was so passionate about computers, and he was afraid to get me a computer, but the dentist talked him into it, and then he ended up letting me get a computer after all that. So then in November of 1980, that's when I got my first microcomputer, the TRS-80 Model 1. And I had that computer for about 7.5 years before I started getting IBM compatible computers. But the coolest thing I did with the TRS-80 computer was that I wrote my own bulletin board system because I was really fascinated when I got my first modem to start dialing out to other computer systems. I remember exploring a lot of bulletin board systems. There were different ones that were run on different types of computers. Like there were bulletin board systems on TRS-80s and Apples and other computers of the day. And I remember being fascinated with the idea of a bulletin board system. So I wrote my own and enjoyed seeing the phone calls come in and stuff. And so that was something I really enjoyed. And so I was really experienced with computer programming long before I grew up. And that really proved to be an advantage for me when I got to college, because when I was working on my computer science degree, I breezed through most of the computer programming classes because I already knew a lot of the concepts. In fact, I'll never forget this one class where um, everybody was struggling to complete one of the midterm exams, and I turned my exam in right at the end of the period, and everybody else had to file into the library with the professor because somebody else had to use the room the next period. So I turn my test in, I go back to my dorm room. Everybody else is filing into the library and struggling to finish their test. And they're grappling with it, struggling to get points. And I end up getting 100 on that test because I already was very knowledgeable. And so everything was straightforward. I mean, what sticks out in my mind is that a lot of kids were having trouble understanding the concept of a pointer in computer programming. And that was very straightforward to me because I already knew about the idea of a pointer because that concept came up in my experience with TRS-80 computer programming. So, so I really did a lot better than a lot of kids on the computer programming classes. And I ended up graduating from, I started out at DePaul University. I did my first 2 years of undergrad there, and then I transferred to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, graduated from there in December of 92. Although I took an extra semester because I had trouble with a couple of classes, uh, I ended up graduating from there. The problem was at University of Illinois is that they had their computer science degree, liberal arts and science degree set up in such a way that you had to joint major with something else. And the only options they had were mathematics or statistics. And those fields are really completely different from computer science because the main reason is that you have to do proofs. And that's something that I really couldn't grasp at the time. So I really struggled with the math classes and even the statistics classes, but I just bumbled through the statistics and ended up graduating in that field. But it turns out that in this day and age, uh, upon looking at the University of Illinois website, I discovered they have a lot of different fields you can joint major in with computer science, including one that I would have really enjoyed back then, which was linguistics, because since I was passionate about computerized speech, I would have loved to have studied linguistics instead of math or statistics. So my degree would have been an easier experience, a more pleasant experience if I could have had that option. But that's just one issue of my struggles in life. Uh, the next thing was that after I graduated, I started working as a computer programmer for various companies. And it seemed like a good idea starting out because I thought that if I had a passion for computer programming, I would enjoy helping companies out to lend my experience as a programmer and produce software for a company. But what I found was that working as a computer programmer for another company was not what I thought it was. Um, because what they do, instead of having you uh, work on a project that they explain to you, where you actually discuss a design spec and then uh, refine a design spec based on clarification from management, which is the way I thought it would work. All they do is basically give you a title of a project or a simple request in 25 words or less, so to speak, and you have to run with that. And all you have is a computer and a cubicle. Now, this was even before the web. So you couldn't, it was very hard to research things because you couldn't go out on the web and find stuff. There was no web. And the powers that be would never give you any point of reference as to what they wanted you to do. And I really struggled with that, but I really didn't know why it was such a struggle. And I would just bumble around and try to guess what to do. But since I didn't have a business background, I really couldn't figure out how to handle requests to improve a business application. For example, they wanted me to improve the shipping process, the RMA system that they had in place. Now, if you tell me what the issues are that you're facing and you give suggestions on how they could be better, then I could offer my assistance. But if you're going to just turn me loose in the cubicle with only a request to improve the RMA system, you're not going to get much out of me, in all honesty. And after many years of struggling with this kind of open-ended nonsense, and then going into my own business and seeing how there was a lot more feedback because I'd hear from my customers. And also in your own business, you don't have to fill time. You don't have to worry about, well, you're scheduled to work for 40 hours a week, so you got to fill all that time. Well, here's the conclusion that I came to. A computer programmer is not a business analyst. And I think that somebody who works in management who does not have a computer science background or degree or anything is going to have unreasonable expectations of programmers because they don't realize how programmers create what they create, because they only see the finished product. And I know for a fact that everything in that company and any other company that was created by a programmer was not just created by the programmer, but there was a feedback source. Like I remember, the first company I worked for worked on a system for pizza delivery restaurants like Domino's. And I remember the head programmer would give demonstrations for various things that he created. Like there was one module called Schedule Master, which managed the staff payroll and the labor, how long they worked, their hours, their pay and everything, and what their schedule was in the store. And I remember him demonstrating that. And I remember him demonstrating an order screen for sub sandwiches, because Domino's was starting to sell sub sandwiches, and they needed the computer system modified to have an order screen for those orders. So I remember this head programmer demonstrating those things. And I remember asking him, how did you come up with the working design for Schedule Master? And he says, well, I consulted with such and such a customer, one of the independent restaurant owners. And I remember him saying that. So I've come to the conclusion that every piece of software that's created by a programmer has a feedback source. So when you come into a job where a manager has no more information than a title for a project, there's something wrong, because the programmer wouldn't know what to do, because there has to be some sort of point of reference as far as what needs to be created. So that was one of the main reasons that I decided, after 6.5 years and 4 jobs, that I didn't want to work for anybody else. I wanted to just leverage my experience and passion for computer programming to design and sell my own applications. So in the summer of 99, I actually had a big fight with my father, because he was the one who was really uh, making me stay with these jobs. I mean, I remember he actually told me that if I went out on my own, I'd be bored, because he thought I'd be sitting at home uh, with my business and not getting out. Now, of course, for the first 20 years of my business, I worked out of an office, and I had to give up the office eventually because they downsized it and didn't have room for me. So I ended up putting my equipment in a colo and working out of my home. But that's really not an issue, because I'm a lot happier being in my own business. Because, for one thing, you don't have to do anything to fill time. I mean, I remember the one thing that the bosses used to harp on was hours. All they would talk about, they would never tell me what to do. They would only tell me about time to spend in the office. You have to be here at such and such a time. You have to stay until such and such a time. You have to work X number of hours. And I mean, the worst thing was when I would come into the office, the first thing uh, my supervisor would do is look at his watch. So it seems like all they know about their staff is the time they have to spend, but they don't know anything about what they should be doing. And I don't know what I should be doing. So nobody knows how to do the job. So after 6.5 years, I'm thinking the jobs are pointless. I'm not going to do it. And I really wanted to go out on my own. So I told my father, I'm not getting anything done. I'm bored in the job. I'm not going to be bored on my own. I'm already bored. I got nothing to lose. And I just totally raised hell with him. And I said, why are you doing this? You're not the one working. I am. I'm the one who knows that it's not making me happy. And then, so at first he was like, he said, he started wisecracking. He says, so quit, like using reverse psychology. But then the next morning, he told me that he was thinking about how when he was about my age, I was 29 years old at the time. And when he was that age, he was thinking about doing various things on his own. Like he wanted to buy a building. He had a passion for real estate. He wanted to start an automobile dealership. He had a passion for brokering cars, buying and selling cars. He wanted to run a dealership out of a building. And his mother tricked him out of doing all that, because she would always say that somebody else that she knew failed at that. That was her excuse. So he was tricked out of doing stuff. And then he realized that if I have a passion for something, I just have to go for it. And that was the best decision that I ever made when I left my last full-time job, because I really felt better about doing my own applications because now that I'm in my own business, I find that I grow more intellectually because I'm free to explore things on my own. I don't have to worry about looking busy in a cubicle where they watch me and all they do is monitor me for productivity. And I'm limited to doing things that look busy to the company. And, that really stunted my creativity. And I also watch Jeopardy, so I'm learning more about the world around me and getting a little bit better at trivia. I've been watching Jeopardy for about 15 years, and I think that since I have gone to trivia conventions where they've played simulated game shows, that was another passion of mine that I enjoyed exploring. And I feel like I've gotten smarter from watching Jeopardy and learning more. And I explore my own ideas starting at the top rather than the bottom. So um, I understand the application that I'm working on better than I would if I stepped into somebody else's application trying to work on it from the bottom. And of course, like I said earlier, I have more access to feedback from the customers, and I can really improve the application. And because I know more about the application going in than I would from another company, I uh, can really act on that feedback better. And it's just a more comfortable way to explore my field of computer programming than being limited to a job. And so all that is why I really wanted to do my own business. Now, the downside, unfortunately, is that you have to worry about making money. You don't have a steady paycheck. But fortunately, through family support, that is not an issue. And I'm able to explore my field at my leisure. And I feel that the benefits outweigh the disadvantages because I'm growing more intellectually than I would uh, if I stayed at those jobs. And I think that's more important than collecting a paycheck. And I think in the long run, things are going to pan out better for me because I'm working on a revolutionary concept that I would have never come up with if I didn't start working on my own applications. Because I run a voicemail system. I got very passionate about computer programming of automated phone applications. And I started out doing a voice internet service that reads email and web pages over the phone and worked with blind people. They're the ones who embraced the system because it gives them an easier way to access the internet than doing it with a computer hooked up to a screen reader. So that was the market that benefited from the voice internet service. And after running that for about 5 years, I started a voicemail system because I discovered blind people using various phone applications to social network with things like voicemail. So I designed a voicemail system that improved on what they were using and catered to what they wanted to do in social networking in the blind phone world, so to speak. And so I tapped a market there, and I am now working on a new concept that I got the idea from a couple of cartoons. I'm going to be designing uh, video voicemail, because the video revolution has happened in the world, and where everything is done with video, because video is so easy to do with modern technology, because you have high speed internet to send video uh, over long distances, and the electronics for storing and displaying video are very abundant and compact, because you can have so much solid state memory, and uh, you can have a video display device on something as small as an iPhone. And full motion video is so prevalent, but one thing that doesn't work with video is voicemail. And I want to do that. So I'm working with a vendor right now to get the hardware and software set up to provide that application. And I know it's going to be revolutionary. So I'm going to be exhibiting at the Consumer Electronics Show to roll it out, and it's going to be awesome.